I was standing on the sidewalk at midnight, clutching a single suitcase, when my own son locked the door behind me and said, "You don't belong here anymore, Mom." At 68, I had just been erased from my own family. But less than 12 hours later, I stood in a hospital hallway as
Hello,
a
Mrs.
man in a
Williams.
white coat
It's so good to see
looked
you.
straight at me
Don't you
and
worry, we'll
said,
take care of you now.
"Everyone,
We've never seen
this
anything
is
like
Joseph
this.
Blackwood, the woman who saved more
Your
lives
immunity
than
is
anyone in
remarkable.
this building." And suddenly, the life they called worthless wasn't what it seemed at all. If this story touches something in your heart, take a moment to like this video and subscribe. I'd really love to hear from you. Have you ever felt unseen or underestimated by your own family? Share your thoughts in the comments and tell me where you're watching from and what time it is for you right now. You're not alone in this. If you had asked me 5 years ago what my life looked like, I would have smiled and told you I was blessed. I lived in a quiet suburban home in Ohio with my son, Daniel Blackwood, and his wife, Melissa. It wasn't a mansion, but it was warm. The kind of place where sunlight poured through the kitchen window every morning, and the coffee pot was always on by 6. Back then, I still believed I belonged there. After my husband passed away, Daniel insisted I move in with them. "You shouldn't be alone, Mom." He had set his hand resting gently on my shoulder. "We'll take care of you." I remember how those words felt. Like safety, like love. And for a while, it really was. I cooked dinners every night. Not just simple meals, but the kind that filled the house with the smell of garlic butter and memories. Daniel used to love my roast chicken. He'd sit at the table loosening his tie and say, "No one cooks like you, Mom." Melissa would smile too, though hers never quite reached her eyes. At first, I ignored it. She was polite, always polite. "Thank you, Joseph," she'd say, never Mom, never once. But there was something else beneath it, something cold. It started with small things. One afternoon, I overheard her on the phone in the living room. I wasn't trying to listen, but when you're older, silence becomes your companion and voices carry. "I don't know how much longer I can do this," she whispered. "It's like having a permanent guest who never leaves." I froze in the hallway. A guest? I had lived in that house for 3 years. That night at dinner, I tried harder than usual. I made Daniel's favorite meal, even baked a pie from scratch. I thought maybe if I reminded them, if I just gave more. Melissa barely touched her food. "We should probably talk about space," she said, suddenly cutting into the quiet like a knife. Daniel looked up. "What do you mean, I mean?" She sighed, placing her fork down carefully. "This arrangement isn't sustainable forever." I felt my chest tighten. "I can help more," I said quickly. "I already handle most of the cooking and I can start covering some expenses once my savings." "It's not about that." Melissa interrupted, her tone, still calm, still controlled. "It's about independence." Independence. Such a simple word. Such a cruel weapon. Daniel didn't look at me. He just rubbed the back of his neck like he always did when he didn't want to choose sides. "Melissa just means we should think long term," he muttered. I nodded slowly, even though something inside me had already begun to crack. "I understand," I said softly. But the truth was, I didn't. Because I had given up my own home to move in with them. Sold it, actually. Daniel said it made more sense financially. Said we'd all benefit. At the time, I trusted him. Why wouldn't I? He was my son. Things changed faster after that conversation. The house didn't feel like mine anymore. Melissa started reorganizing everything, my kitchen, my cupboards, even the way I folded the towels. "It's just more efficient this way," she'd say, gently correcting me over and over again. I stopped arguing. Then came the finances. One evening, I noticed my access to the shared account had been removed. I thought it was a mistake. "Daniel?" I asked carefully. "I can't seem to log into the account anymore." He didn't look up from his phone. Yeah, Melissa thought it would be easier if she handled everything. Easier for who, I asked. For all of us, he replied too quickly. I felt something sink deep in my stomach. I like to keep track of things, I said. You don't need to worry about that anymore, Mom. Not need. Like my role had quietly expired. I started keeping cash in an envelope in my drawer after that. Not much, but enough to remind myself I still had some control. Or at least I thought I did. The final shift came with the locks. It was a Tuesday afternoon. I had gone out to buy groceries, milk bread, a few things Melissa had written on the list. When I came back, my key didn't work. At first, I thought I was using the wrong one. I tried again and again. Nothing. I stood there on the porch, bags cutting into my fingers, my heart beating faster with every second. Then, the door opened. Melissa stood there blocking the entrance. Oh, I stood there on the porch, bags cutting into my fingers, my heart beating faster with every second. Then, the door opened. Melissa stood there, blocking the entrance. Oh, she said, as if she had just remembered something minor. We changed the locks this morning. I stared at her. Without telling me. It was a security decision, she replied smoothly. You know how things are these days? Then why don't I have the new key? My voice trembled despite my effort to stay calm. She hesitated for half a second. Just long enough. We'll get you one, she said. Later. Behind her, I saw Daniel sitting on the couch, watching, not moving, not saying a word. That was the moment I realized something I had been refusing to see for months. I wasn't part of their home anymore. I was just still there, a leftover piece they hadn't figured out how to remove. I stepped inside, slowly placing the groceries on the counter like I always did. But nothing felt the same. The walls were the same. The furniture was the same. But I wasn't. That night, I lay awake in bed, staring at the ceiling, listening to the faint sound of their laughter downstairs. And for the first time in my life, I asked myself a question that terrified me. What happens to a mother when her own child stops seeing her as one I didn't know the answer yet? But I could feel it coming. After the locks were changed, something inside me stopped hoping things would go back to the way they used to be. It wasn't just about the door. It was about what that door meant. From that day on, I began noticing everything I had been too afraid to fully see before. Little things at first, then bigger ones, and then things I couldn't ignore anymore. Melissa stopped including me in anything that resembled a family decision. Not that she ever really had, but now it was obvious. Conversations would stop when I walked into the room. Plans would be made without me right in front of me. Daniel and I are thinking about remodeling the kitchen, she said one evening, scrolling through pictures on her tablet. I looked up from my tea. Oh, that sounds nice. What kind of changes? She didn't even glance at me. We're still deciding, she said shortly. Daniel sat next to her, nodding along, completely absorbed in whatever she was showing him. I waited, just a second longer than necessary, hoping foolishly that he might turn to me and ask my opinion. He didn't. I took a quiet sip of my tea and stared at the steam rising from the cup, pretending it didn't sting. Because the truth was, I had once chosen every detail of that kitchen. The cabinets, the tiles, even the color of the walls. But now, I was being erased from it piece by piece. Then came the mail. One afternoon, I noticed a stack of letters on the counter. A stack of letters on the counter, everything addressed to Daniel and Melissa. Mine was missing. Did anything come for me? I asked. Melissa barely looked up. If it did, it's probably junk. I threw some things out earlier. Everything addressed to Daniel and Melissa. Mine was missing. Did anything come for me? I asked. Melissa barely looked up. If it did, it's probably junk. I threw some things out earlier. You threw them out, I repeated. Just the unimportant stuff, she said with a shrug. My name, my letters, my life, reduced to unimportant. That night, I went to check the mailbox myself. There was nothing inside, but something else caught my eye. My name. It was gone. The small metal plate that used to read Blackwood with all three of our names beneath it, Daniel, Melissa, and Joseph, had been replaced. Now it only said Daniel and Melissa Blackwood. I stood there longer than I should have, staring at it, as if maybe if I looked hard enough, my name would reappear. It didn't. I reached out and touched the cold metal, my fingers trembling slightly. That was when it hit me fully. They weren't just pushing me out emotionally. They were removing me physically. I reached out and touched the cold metal, my fingers trembling slightly. That was when it hit me fully. They weren't just pushing me out emotionally. They were removing me physically from every part of their world. I walked back inside slowly, my chest heavy, my thoughts louder than the silence around me. Inside, Melissa was laughing at something on her phone. Daniel was beside her, relaxed, comfortable, like nothing had changed. Like I hadn't changed. Hey, I said quietly. They both looked up. I noticed my name isn't on the mailbox anymore. Melissa didn't even blink. Oh, she said casually. Yeah, we updated it. Updated it? I repeated. Well, it's just more accurate this way, she replied. Since it's technically our house, not home, not family, just ownership. I looked at Daniel, waiting for him to say something, anything, to correct her, to defend me, to remind her that I was more than just a temporary presence in their life. But he didn't. He just looked uncomfortable, shifted slightly, and then said the one thing I wish I could forget. It's not a big deal, Mom. Not a big deal. That was the moment something inside me went quiet. Not broken, not shattered, just quiet. Because when pain reaches a certain point, it doesn't scream anymore. It just settles in like it belongs there. After that, I stopped asking questions, stopped offering opinions, stopped trying. I moved through the house like a shadow, cleaning, cooking, existing in the background of a life that no longer included me. But even that wasn't enough, because soon they started controlling things I didn't even realize they could. One morning, I went to use my debit card at the grocery store. It declined. I tried again. Still declined. I stood there, my face flushing with embarrassment as the line behind me grew longer. I'm sorry, I whispered to the cashier. There must be a mistake. I stepped aside and called Daniel. Hey, I said, trying to keep my voice steady. My card isn't working. There was a pause. Then, yeah, Melissa and I talked about that. My heart dropped. Talked about what? We just think it's better if we manage the finances moving forward, he said. It's less confusing that way. Less confusing for who? I asked, my voice barely above a whisper. For everyone, Mom. Everyone, except me. So how am I supposed to buy things? I asked. You can just let us know what you need, he replied. We'll take care of it. Like I was a child. Like I had no right to my own independence. I hung up the phone slowly, my hand shaking. In that moment, standing in that grocery store with empty hands, I realized something terrifying. I wasn't just being pushed out. I was being controlled, piece by piece, until there was nothing left of me that belonged to me. That night, I sat in my room staring at the small envelope of cash I had hidden away. It wasn't much, but it was mine. And for the first time in a long time, I felt something rise inside me. Not anger, not yet, but something close. Something that whispered, "This isn't right." Still, I stayed. Because where would I go? Who would take me in? And maybe, just maybe, I kept telling myself Daniel would come around. He had to. He was my son. But deep down, I think I already knew the truth. I just wasn't ready to face it yet. The day they asked me to leave didn't come with shouting. No slammed doors. No dramatic confrontation. It came quietly. Calmly. Almost politely. And somehow, that made it worse. It was a Friday evening. I remember because I had just finished making dinner spaghetti with garlic bread, something simple, something familiar. The kind of meal that used to bring us together. I set the table like I always did. 3 plates, 3 glasses, 3 people. Still pretending. Still holding on to something that had already slipped away. Melissa walked into the kitchen first. She glanced at the table, then at me. "We need to talk," she said. My hands froze, mid-motion, still holding a folded napkin. Daniel followed behind her, slower, quieter. His shoulders slightly hunched, like he already knew what was coming and didn't want to face it. I nodded. "Okay," I said softly, placing the napkin down. We sat at the table, but no one touched the food. Melissa folded her hands neatly in front of her, her expression calm. Too calm. "We've been thinking about the living situation," she began. There it was again. That phrase. Living situation. As if I were a temporary arrangement, a problem to be solved. I looked at Daniel. He avoided my eyes. "I see," I said quietly, and Melissa took a breath. "I think it's time we make a change." The words hung in the air, heavy and final. "A change," I repeated. "Yes," she said. "We believe it would be best if you found somewhere else to live." There it was. Clear. Direct. Unmistakable. For a moment, I didn't feel anything. No anger. No tears. Just silence. Like my body needed a second to catch up with what my ears had just heard. I turned to Daniel. "Is this what you want?" I asked. He shifted in his seat. "It's not about what I want, Mom," he said, his voice low. "It's about what's best for everyone." Everyone. That word again. Always everyone. Except me. "I thought I was part of everyone," I said. Melissa sighed as if I were making things more difficult than necessary. "Joseph, this isn't personal," she said. "It's just practical." Practical. Such a convenient word for something so cruel. "I gave up my home to come here," I said, my voice barely steady. "You asked me to move in, and we're grateful for that," she replied quickly. "But things change." "Yes," I whispered. "They do." Daniel finally looked at me then. For a brief second, I saw something in his eyes. Guilt. Maybe even regret. But it disappeared just as quickly. "You're strong, Mom," he said. "You'll figure something out." I stared at him. At the boy I had raised. The child I had held through fevers, through nightmares, through every moment he needed me. And now he was telling me I would figure something out. Like I was a stranger. Like I was disposable. When I asked. Melissa didn't hesitate. "As soon as possible." "How soon is as soon as possible?" I pressed. She glanced at Daniel, then back at me. "This weekend would be ideal." The words hit me like a physical blow. "This weekend," I repeated. It's already Friday, she said. That gives you a couple of days. A couple of days. To pack up a life. To disappear from a place I once called home. I let out a slow breath, trying to steady myself. I don't have anywhere to go, I said. Daniel rubbed his forehead. Maybe you could stay at a motel for a while, he suggested. A motel? At 68 years old? After everything? I nodded slowly, not because I agreed, but because I understood something now. There was no convincing them, no explaining, no reminding them of who I was or what I had done for them. To them, I was already gone. This was just the final step. The rest of the evening passed in silence. No one ate dinner. I cleared the table alone, my movements mechanical, my thoughts distant. They went upstairs early, as if nothing had happened, as if they hadn't just dismantled my entire world in a matter of minutes. That night, I packed. One suitcase. That's all I allowed myself. Not because I didn't have more things, but because I refused to beg for space. I folded my clothes carefully, placing each item inside as if I were handling something fragile. Because in a way I was. Pieces of a life that no longer fit anywhere. I paused when I reached the back of my closet. There, hanging quietly, was an old white coat. I hadn't worn it in years. I ran my fingers over the fabric, feeling the faint texture beneath my skin. For a moment, I considered taking it. Then I stopped. Not yet. I closed the closet door gently. Some things belonged to a different version of me, a version I wasn't ready to face. By Saturday evening, my suitcase was by the door. Daniel stood in the hallway, hands in his pockets. You sure you got everything he asked? I looked around the house one last time. The living room, the kitchen, the staircase, all the places that used to feel like mine. I think so, I said. Melissa appeared behind him, arms crossed. Let us know when you find a place, she said. We can send over anything you forgot. I nodded, though I knew I wouldn't be coming back for anything. Daniel reached for the door, and for a brief second, I thought he might stop. Might say something. Might realize what he was doing. But he didn't. He just opened it and stepped aside. I picked up my suitcase, walked past them, and stepped out into the night. The air was colder than I expected, or maybe I just wasn't prepared for how it would feel to be outside. Homeless, unwanted, alone. I turned back once, just once, hoping foolishly that maybe they'd be standing there, that maybe Daniel would call out my name, but the door closed, quietly, completely. And just like that, I was no longer part of their life. I stood there on the sidewalk, my suitcase beside me, the weight of everything pressing down on my chest. And for the first time since all of this began, I didn't feel confused. I didn't feel uncertain. I felt something else, something sharper, something clearer, something that whispered deep inside me. This isn't the end. But I didn't know yet just how much my life was about to change. That first night, I didn't drive far. I told myself I would find a motel, check and rest, figure things out like Daniel said. But when you've just been erased from your own life, you don't think clearly. You just drift. I ended up parked in a quiet grocery store lot about 10 minutes away from the house. The same store I had shopped at for years. The same one where my card had been declined just days before. I turned off the engine, and for a long time, I just sat there, hands in my lap, eyes fixed on nothing. It was strange how quiet the world felt. Not peaceful, just empty. The kind of silence that presses in on you until your own thoughts become too loud to ignore. I glanced at the passenger seat where my suitcase rested. One suitcase. After a lifetime. I let out a soft breath, leaning back against the seat. Well, I whispered to myself, my voice barely audible, this is it. No one answered. Of course not. That was the hardest part. Not the cold, not the uncertainty. It was the realization that there was no one left to call. No one who would say, "Come stay with me." No one who would open a door. I pulled my coat tighter around me as the night grew colder. The car wasn't meant for sleeping, especially not at my age. My back protested immediately, my legs stiff, my neck unable to find a comfortable position. But exhaustion eventually won. It always does. I must have fallen asleep at some point because when I opened my eyes again, the sky was still dark, but lighter than before. Early morning. The kind of hour where the world hasn't quite woken up yet. For a moment, I forgot where I was. Then I shifted slightly, and everything came rushing back. The house, the door closing, Daniel's voice. You'll figure something out. I swallowed hard and sat up slowly, wincing at the ache in my body. This isn't temporary, I murmured to myself, because deep down, I knew it wasn't. I stepped out of the car, stretching my stiff limbs, the cool air biting against my skin. The parking lot was nearly empty. A few early workers moving in and out of the store. A janitor sweeping near the entrance. Life going on. As if nothing had happened. As if my entire world hadn't collapsed just hours before. I walked toward the building more out of instinct than purpose. Inside, the fluorescent lights felt harsh against my eyes. I made my way to the restroom, splashed cold water on my face, and stared at my reflection. For a long moment, I didn't recognize the woman looking back at me. Her hair was slightly disheveled, her eyes tired, her expression hollow. But beneath all of that, there was something else. Something I hadn't seen in a long time. Strength. Faint. Fragile, but still there. You're still here, I whispered to my reflection. And somehow, that mattered. After I left the restroom, I wandered through the aisles without really thinking. Old habits. I picked up a loaf of bread, then put it back. A carton of milk, then back again. I had to remind myself I couldn't just buy things anymore. Not like before. Instead, I grabbed a small bottle of water and a granola bar. Something simple. Something I could afford with the cash I had hidden away. At the checkout, I paid in cash. The cashier barely looked at me. Just another customer. Just another face. And for the first time in days, I felt something close to relief. Because being invisible to strangers hurt less than being invisible to your own family. I stepped outside and sat on a nearby bench, slowly eating the granola bar. It wasn't much, but it was enough. Enough to keep going. Enough to think. And as I sat there, something shifted inside me. A question. A quiet, persistent question that refused to be ignored. Who was I before all of this? Not as a mother, not as someone's responsibility, not as a burden, but as me. I closed my eyes, and for the first time in a long while, I allowed myself to remember. The hospital, the long corridors, the sound of machines, the weight of responsibility, the feeling of knowing someone's life depended on you. My fingers tightened slightly around the water bottle. I could almost hear it again. Voices calling out, orders being given, decisions being made in seconds. There was a time when I wasn't invisible. A time when people looked at me with trust, with respect, with need. I opened my eyes slowly. That was a long time ago, I said to myself. Too long. Life had changed. I had changed. Or had I? I sat there for a while longer, letting the thought settle, because something about it didn't feel like the past. It felt unfinished. But I didn't have time to chase that feeling. Not yet. Right now, I needed something more immediate. A plan. I looked down at the small envelope of cash in my purse, counted it carefully. It wasn't much. Enough for a few nights at a cheap motel, maybe. Enough to buy a little time. And time was what I needed. I stood up, steadying myself. Okay, I said quietly, one step at a time. I walked back to my car, my movement slow but deliberate. The sun was beginning to rise now, casting a soft, golden light over the parking lot. A new day. It didn't feel like a fresh start. Not yet, but it felt like something. I got into the driver's seat and sat there for a moment, my hands resting on the wheel. Then, almost without thinking, I reached into the glove compartment. Inside was an old photograph. One I had kept there for years. I pulled it out carefully. It showed me standing in a hospital hallway, wearing a white coat, smiling, confident, alive in a way I hadn't felt in a very long time. I traced the edge of the photo with my finger. That woman, I whispered. She didn't disappear. She couldn't have, because if she had, then what was left of me now? I placed the photo back in the glove compartment and closed it gently. Then I started the engine. I didn't know exactly where I was going, but for the first time since I stepped out of that house, I wasn't just running away. I was moving forward, and somewhere deep inside, something was beginning to wake up. Something that had been buried for years. Something that wasn't ready to be forgotten. I just didn't know yet how much it was about to change everything. I drove for nearly an hour before I finally stopped. Not because I knew where I was going, but because my hands were starting to shake on the steering wheel. There's something about being alone on the road with nowhere to go that forces you to confront the truth faster than anything else. I needed help. Even if I didn't want to admit it, I pulled into the parking lot of a small roadside motel. Nothing fancy, just a faded sign flickering weakly in the early morning light. The kind of place people passed by without noticing. The kind of place you went when you had no other options. I sat there for a moment, staring at the building. Just a few nights, I whispered to myself. Just until you figure things out. I grabbed my purse, stepped out of the car, and walked toward the front desk. The man behind the counter barely looked up. "Room?" he asked. "Yes," I said softly. He quoted the price. I hesitated, not because I didn't understand, but because I was already calculating how long I could survive like this. Still, I nodded and handed him the cash. A few minutes later, I was standing in a small, dimly lit room that smelled faintly of cleaning chemicals and something older, something worn. It wasn't home, but it was shelter. I placed my suitcase on the bed and sat down beside it, letting out a long breath. For the first time since everything happened, I was inside. Safe at least for now. But safety didn't mean peace, because the moment the door closed behind me, the silence returned. Louder than ever. I lay back on the bed, staring at the ceiling, my thoughts drifting in and out like waves. What now? That question echoed over and over again. What now? I had no job, no home, no family. Just a few dollars a suitcase and a past I hadn't thought about in years. I turned my head slightly, looking at my purse resting on the nightstand. Inside it was my phone, and suddenly another thought surfaced. There were numbers in there. old contacts, people I hadn't spoken to in years, people from a different life. I sat up slowly, my heart beginning to beat just a little faster. "No," I murmured. "It's been too long. What would I even say? Hi, it's Joseph. I know I disappeared for years, but now I'm homeless. Can you help me?" The thought alone made my chest tighten. I shook my head and stood up, pacing the small room. I can handle this, I told myself. I've handled worse. But had I? The truth was, I wasn't sure anymore. I stopped pacing when my eyes landed on the small desk near the window. Something about it felt familiar. A place to sit, to think, to decide. I pulled out the chair and sat down slowly. For a long moment, I just rested my hands on the surface, staring at nothing. Then, almost without thinking, I reached for my phone. My fingers hovered over the screen. There were so many names, so many people I used to know. But time has a way of creating distance, and distance turns into silence. I scrolled slowly. Past neighbors, past acquaintances, past everything. Until I saw a name that made my breath catch slightly. St. Mary's Medical Center. I stared at it. My old workplace. I hadn't even realized I still had the number saved. My thumb hovered over it. Memories rushed back instantly. The long shifts, the endless nights, the weight of responsibility, the sense of purpose. And then the moment I walked away from it all, I swallowed hard. That was a different life, I whispered. A life I had left behind. A life I had chosen to leave behind. But now, I wasn't so sure. I locked the phone and set it down on the desk. "No," I said firmly. "That's not where I go. Not yet." Instead, I stood up and walked to the window, pulling the curtain aside slightly. Outside, the world was moving. Cars passing by. People going to work. Normal life continuing without me. I pressed my hand lightly against the glass. "I need something," I whispered. Not just a place to stay. Not just money. I needed purpose. Because without it, I was already disappearing. Just like I had in that house. Just like I had in my own family. I closed my eyes for a moment, and when I opened them again, my phone started ringing. The sound startled me so much, I actually jumped slightly. It echoed loudly in the quiet room. I turned quickly, staring at it. It kept ringing. Unknown number. I hesitated. For a second, I considered letting it go to voicemail. Because lately, every unexpected call felt like it carried bad news. More loss. More rejection. More reminders of everything I had already lost. But something stopped me. A feeling. A quiet, persistent nudge I couldn't quite explain. I walked over slowly and picked up the phone. "Hello?" I said cautiously. There was a brief pause on the other end, then a voice, professional, urgent. "Is this Joseph Blackwood?" My heart skipped. "Yes, this is she." Another pause, as if the person on the other end was choosing their words carefully. "My name is Sarah. I am calling from St. Mary's Medical Center." My heart skipped. "Yes, this is she." Another pause, as if the person on the other end was choosing their words carefully. "My name is Sarah. I'm calling from St. Mary's Medical Center." Everything inside me went still, completely still. For a moment, I couldn't even breathe. I'm sorry," I said, my voice unsteady. "Did you say Saint?" "Mary's?" "Yes," she replied. We need you to come in. I blinked. I think there's been a mistake, I said quickly. I don't work there anymore. We know, she said. Her tone didn't change, didn't hesitate, which somehow made it even more unsettling. Then, why are you calling me? I asked. Another pause. Longer this time. He specifically asked for you, she said. Who? I whispered. The hospital director, she replied. Dr. Andrew Collins. The name hit me like a distant echo. Familiar, but buried under years of silence. I don't understand, I said. Why would he? I'm sorry, she interrupted gently, but this is urgent. He said you're the only one who can help. The only one. My grip tightened on the phone. That's not possible, I said. There are plenty of qualified people there. Not for this, she replied. Silence fell between us. Heavy, charged. And then she said the one thing that made my heart start pounding in a way I hadn't felt in years. Please, she said quietly. Lives are at stake. Lives. I closed my eyes slowly, and just like that, everything I thought I had left behind came rushing back. For a few seconds after the call ended, I just stood there. Phone still in my hand. Heart pounding so loudly I could hear it in my ears. Lives are at stake. The words echoed over and over again, cutting through everything else, my fear, my hesitation, my doubt. I hadn't heard that phrase in years. Not like that, not with that urgency, not with that weight. I slowly lowered the phone, my fingers trembling slightly. This doesn't make sense, I whispered. Why would they call me? After all this time, there were dozens, no hundreds, of capable doctors still working at St. Mary's. People younger, sharper, more up to date than I could ever be now. I hadn't stepped foot in that hospital in over a decade. So why me? I turned and sat back down on the edge of the bed, my thoughts racing. Maybe it was a mistake. Maybe they had the wrong person. Maybe. The phone rang again. I flinched. Same number. I stared at it for a second, then answered. Hello? Ms. Blackwood? Sarah's voice came through a Blackwood. Sarah's voice came through again, tighter this time. Are you on your way? I hesitated. I don't think you understand. I haven't practiced in years. We understand, she said quickly. Dr. Collins knows that too. Then why? He said to tell you this gain tighter this time. Are you on your way? I hesitated. I don't think you understand. I haven't practiced in years. We understand? She said quickly. Dr. Collins knows that too. Then why? He said to tell you this, she interrupted. There was a brief pause. Then carefully, she repeated, she'll remember the protocol. She always does. My breath caught. Protocol. Not just any word. The word. My hand tightened around the phone. How does he know that I asked my voice barely above a whisper? He said you trained him, Sarah replied. The world seemed to tilt slightly beneath me. Trained him. Andrew Collins, of course. The name suddenly snapped into focus. He wasn't just some distant memory. He had been one of mine, a young resident years ago. Brilliant, but reckless. Always rushing. Always trying to prove something. And I had been the one to slow him down. To teach him discipline. To teach him how to save lives properly. I closed my eyes for a moment. And just like that, the past wasn't distant anymore. It was right there. Alive. Waiting. I need you to come in, Sarah said again, more gently this time. Please. I didn't respond right away, because suddenly I wasn't just thinking about the hospital. I was thinking about everything that had happened since I left it, the choices I had made, the life I had built, the sacrifices. I had walked away from that world for a reason. I had chosen my family, chosen Daniel, chosen to be present, to be there for every moment he needed me. And now, that same family had pushed me out like I was nothing. I let out a slow breath. Where exactly do you need me? I asked. There was a pause, then a small shift in her tone. Relief. I'll text you the address and details, she said quickly. Thank you. The call ended, and just like that, the decision was made. I sat there for another minute, staring at the wall, trying to process what I had just agreed to. Then I stood up, slowly, deliberately, because something inside me had changed. Not dramatically, not all at once, but enough. Enough to take the next step. I walked over to my suitcase and opened it. Clothes, simple things, practical things, but nothing that felt like who I used to be. I paused, then turned toward the closet. There was nothing there, of course. This wasn't my home. This wasn't even a place I intended to stay. But my mind went back to something else. The white coat. The one I had left behind. For a second, doubt crept in. You're not that person anymore. You don't belong there. You've been gone too long. But then another voice answered. Quiet. Steady. You were never just one thing. I closed the suitcase again and grabbed my purse. The coat could wait, because if I needed it, they would have one for me there. I took one last look around the motel room. The small bed, the worn carpet, the silence. And I realized something. This place was temporary, just like everything else. I stepped outside the morning sun, now fully risen, casting long shadows across the parking lot. For a moment, I stood still, letting the light hit my face, letting the air fill my lungs. Then I walked to my car, got in, and started the engine. As I pulled out of the parking lot, my hands felt steadier than they had in days. Not because I had everything figured out, but because for the first time, I had direction. The drive to the hospital felt both familiar and foreign at the same time. The roads hadn't changed. The buildings were mostly the same, but I had. Every mile brought a new wave of memories. Long nights, emergency calls, the constant pressure of knowing one mistake could cost a life. And beneath all of that, a feeling I hadn't allowed myself to feel in years. Purpose. By the time the hospital came into view, my heart was beating fast again. Not from fear, not entirely, but from something deeper. Something that felt like returning. I pulled into the parking lot and sat there for a moment staring at the entrance. People moved in and out just like they always had. Doctors, nurses, patients, life. And for a second, I hesitated. Because walking through those doors meant facing everything I had left behind. Everything I had buried. Everything I had tried to forget. You can leave, a voice in my head whispered. No one's forcing you to do this. But another voice answered. Stronger. Clearer. They called you for a reason. I took a deep breath, then opened the door and stepped out. The moment my feet touched the ground, something shifted. Not outside, inside. I straightened slightly, lifted my chin, and walked toward the entrance. Each step heavier than the last, but also more certain. Because no matter what waited for me inside, I knew one thing now. I wasn't just the woman my family had rejected. I wasn't just someone who had been pushed aside. I was something more, something they had forgotten, something I had almost forgotten too. And as the doors of St. Mary's opened in front of me, I realized I was about to remember exactly who I was. The moment I stepped inside St. Mary's, everything came rushing back. The smell. That distinct mixture of antiseptic metal and something almost impossible to describe unless you've lived inside it. The scent of urgency of life hanging in the balance. My footsteps slowed as I crossed the lobby. People brushed past me. Nurses in scrubs, doctors in white coats, patients being wheeled through corridors. But no one paid attention to me. Not yet. To them, I was just another older woman walking through the doors. And for a brief second, I wondered if that's all I was now. But then, Ms. Blackwood, I turned. A young woman hurried toward me, her badge bouncing slightly against her chest. "Sarah?" I asked. "Yes," she said, slightly out of breath. "Thank you for coming." Her eyes scanned me quickly, not with judgment, but with something else. Relief. Real, unmistakable relief. "I wasn't sure you would," she added. "I almost didn't," I admitted. She nodded, as if she understood more than I had said. "This way," she said quickly. "They're waiting. They—" The word made my chest tighten again. As I followed her down the hallway, I couldn't help but notice how familiar everything felt. The layout, the turns, the way the light hit the polished floors. Even the sounds, monitors beeping voices, calling out orders, footsteps echoing, felt like a language I hadn't forgotten. "You remember where you're going, don't you?" Sarah asked, suddenly glancing back at me. I gave a faint, almost surprised smile. "More than I expected," I said. She smiled back just briefly. "Dr. Collins said you would." We turned a corner, and suddenly the atmosphere shifted. The air felt heavier, tenser. Voices were louder here, more urgent, more focused. "Code team is waiting. Vitals dropping. We need a decision now." The words hit me like a wave, and without thinking, my pace quickened. Not because Sarah was leading me, but because something inside me recognized this moment. This exact kind of moment. We reached a set of double doors. Sarah pushed them open, and I stepped into a room filled with people. Doctors, nurses, residents, all gathered around a single bed. A patient lay there, barely visible beneath the movement and equipment surrounding them. For a split second, no one noticed me. And then, Joseph. The voice cut through everything. Clear, certain. I turned. Dr. Andrew Collins stood on the other side of the room. Older now, more composed. But his eyes, I recognized them instantly. The same intensity, the same sharpness. Only now, there was something else there too. Respect. He walked toward me, quickly stopping just a few feet away. "I wasn't sure you'd come," he said. "You seem to have a habit of saying that," I replied quietly. A faint smile touched his lips. "Some habits don't change," he said. Then his expression shifted, focused, serious. "We don't have much time." I nodded. "What's the situation?" He stepped aside slightly, gesturing toward the patient. "Severe complications post-surgery," he explained. "We've tried everything standard. Nothing's working." I moved closer to the bed, my eyes scanning the monitors, the equipment, the patient's condition. And just like that, the world narrowed. The noise faded. The people disappeared. There was only the problem, only the patient, only the choices that needed to be made. "What have you done so far?" I asked. One of the younger doctors began listing procedures rapidly, his voice tight with pressure. I listened, carefully. But even before he finished, I already knew. They're following the updated protocol, I said quietly. Andrew nodded. Yes. I looked back at the patient, then at the monitors, then at the team. And something deep inside me clicked. No, I said. The word came out calm, certain, but it cut through the room like a blade. The young doctor stopped mid-sentence. I'm sorry, he said. They're too far gone for the updated protocol. I continued, my voice steady. It won't work at this stage. A ripple of tension moved through the room. That's the current standard, another doctor said, his tone defensive. I know, I replied. I met his eyes, and it's not enough. Silence fell. All eyes turned to Andrew. He didn't hesitate. What do you suggest? He asked. That question, that simple, direct question, it did something to me. Because it wasn't just about the patient. It was about trust. He still trusted me. After all these years, after everything. I took a slow breath, then stepped closer to the bed. We go back, I said. Back, the young doctor repeated. To the original protocol, I clarified. The one before the revisions. That's outdated, he said immediately. It's specific, I corrected, and it was designed for cases like this. The room was completely silent now. You remember it? Andrew asked. I looked at him, then back at the patient. I wrote it, I said, and just like that, everything shifted. The tension in the room didn't disappear, but it changed, from doubt to attention. Walk us through it, Andrew said. I nodded, and then I began, step by step, clear, precise, each instruction flowing naturally like it had never left me. The team moved quickly following my lead, adjusting, repositioning, responding. The monitors fluctuated wildly at first, heart rate unstable, vitals dropping. For a moment, it looked like we were losing them. Stay with it, I said firmly. No hesitation, no doubt, because I had seen this before. I had stood in this exact moment more times than I could count, and I knew this was the turning point. Seconds stretched. The room held its breath. And then a sound, sharp, clear. The monitor stabilized. The rhythm returned, steady, alive. A collective exhale filled the room. Someone whispered, "Oh my God." Another nurse covered her mouth, eyes wide. And Andrew. He didn't say anything at first. He just looked at me, and in that look, I saw it. Recognition. Not of who I had been outside these walls, but of who I truly was. You did it, he said quietly. I shook my head. We did it, I corrected. But deep down, I knew. Something had just happened. Something bigger than one patient, bigger than one moment, because for the first time in years, I didn't feel invisible. I didn't feel unwanted. I didn't feel like a burden. I felt needed. And as I stood there, surrounded by a room full of people who had just witnessed what I could do, I realized something. My life hadn't ended when that door closed behind me. It had just changed direction, and I was only beginning to understand where it was leading. The room didn't return to normal after the patient stabilized. It couldn't, because something had shifted not just in the monitors, not just in the team, but in the way they were looking at me. I could feel it, even before anyone said a word. The young doctor who had questioned me earlier stepped back slightly, his expression no longer defensive, but uncertain, almost humbled. A nurse glanced at me, then whispered something to another nurse, And Andrew. He hadn't moved. He was still watching me the same way, like he wasn't just seeing the woman standing in front of him, but the one I used to be. "Clear the room," he said finally, his voice calm but firm. There was a brief hesitation. Then the team began to disperse slowly, reluctantly, as if they didn't want to leave the moment behind. Within seconds, it was just the two of us and the steady rhythm of the monitor behind me. I exhaled quietly, only then realizing how tightly I had been holding myself together. "You still do that," Andrew said. I turned to him. "Do what take control without raising your voice," he replied. "You always did." A faint smile touched my lips, but it didn't last long. "That was a long time ago," I said. He shook his head. "No," he said quietly. "It wasn't." There was something in his tone that made me pause. Not disagreement, certainty. I looked down at my hands. They weren't shaking anymore, not even slightly. "That protocol," he continued, stepping a little closer. "No one here knew it existed." I frowned slightly. "It was documented." "It was," he said, "but it was archived after the revisions. Most of the current staff has never even seen it." I felt a strange heaviness settle in my chest. "So they replaced it," I said. "We updated it," he corrected gently. "Medicine evolves." "Yes," I agreed, "but sometimes we forget why things worked in the first place." He nodded slowly. "That's why I called you." I looked up at him, searching his face. "And you were sure I'd come." "I was hoping," he said. There was a brief silence. Then he added more quietly, "I also knew if anyone remembered how to save that patient, it would be you." The words landed deeper than I expected. Not because of the compliment, but because of what they meant. For years, I had been told directly or indirectly that I was no longer needed, that I had nothing left to offer, that my time had passed. And yet, here I was, standing in a room where one decision had made the difference between life and death. I swallowed slowly. I almost didn't answer the call, I admitted. Andrew didn't seem surprised. I figured, he said. "Then why take the risk?" I asked. He didn't hesitate. "Because I remembered who you are," he said. "Not who I was, who I am." The distinction hit me harder than anything else. Before I could respond, the door opened slightly. Sarah stepped back in, hesitating when she saw us. "Sorry," she said. "I just wanted to check." She stopped mid-sentence, looking between us. Andrew turned to her. "How's the patient stable?" She said, a hint of amazement still in her voice. "Vitals are holding." He nodded once. "Good." She looked at me, then her expression shifting. Not just relief this time. Something more. Respect. "Thank you," she said softly. I nodded, unsure what to say. She gave a small smile, then quietly closed the door behind her again. Silence returned, but it felt different now. Lighter. Less suffocating. "You should see this," Andrew said suddenly. "What I asked." He walked over to a nearby counter and picked up a tablet, tapping on the screen a few times before handing it to me. I took it, glancing down. At first, I didn't understand what I was looking at. Then I did. My name. Joseph Blackwood, document after document. Reports, protocols, case studies. My work, my contributions, my legacy. All still there. All still being used. "They never removed your work," Andrew said quietly. "Even after you left." I stared at the screen, my vision blurring slightly. I thought I began, then stopped. You thought it didn't matter anymore, he finished. I nodded slowly. That it had been replaced, I said. Some of it was, he admitted, but not all of it. He stepped closer. You trained half the senior staff here, he added. Your methods, your approach, it's still part of this hospital. I let out a shaky breath. For years, I had believed that everything I had built, everything I had given, had simply faded away, forgotten, irrelevant. But now, I was looking at proof that it hadn't, that it was still here, still saving lives, even without me. You never stopped being part of this place, Andrew said. The words settled deep inside me, not as a revelation, but as a realization. Because somewhere deep down, I think I had always known. I just didn't want to believe it mattered. Not after everything that had happened. Not after everything I had lost. I handed the tablet back to him slowly. Why now? I asked. He looked at me carefully. Because today, he said, we needed something no one else could give. And that was I asked. He held my gaze. Experience, he said. Then, after a brief pause and instinct, I let out a quiet breath. Instinct. That was the part no one could teach. No one could replace. It came from years of standing exactly where I had just stood, making decisions when there was no time to doubt, trusting yourself even when everything around you said otherwise. I don't know if I can do this again, I said honestly. He didn't argue, didn't try to convince me. He simply nodded. You don't have to decide that today, he said. Then he added, but I think you already know the answer. I didn't respond, because he was right. I did know. I just wasn't ready to say it out loud yet. As I turned toward the door, preparing to leave the room, I paused for a moment. Looking back at the bed, at the patient, at the steady rhythm of the monitor. Alive, because of something I had almost forgotten I could still do. And in that moment, I realized something that changed everything. My family had been wrong about me. But worse than that, I had started to believe them, until now. I didn't leave the hospital right away, even after everything settled, even after the room emptied, even after the adrenaline faded from my body. I stayed. Not because anyone asked me to, but because something inside me wasn't ready to walk away again. I found myself sitting in a quiet corner of the hallway watching people pass by. Doctors moving with purpose, nurses exchanging updates, families waiting, hoping, life in all its fragile, unpredictable forms. And for the first time in years, I felt like I belonged somewhere again. You used to sit there too. I looked up. Andrew stood a few feet away, hands in his coat pockets, a faint smile on his face. I did, I asked. Every time you finished a difficult case, he said. You'd sit there just like that and think. I glanced at the spot beside me, then back at him. I guess some habits don't change, I said quietly. He walked over and leaned lightly against the wall. Do you remember why you stopped? He asked. The question caught me off guard, not because I didn't know the answer, but because I hadn't said it out loud in years. I looked down at my hands, at the faint lines, the signs of time, at everything they had held and everything they had let go. My husband died, I said softly. Andrew nodded. I remember. It happened fast. I continued. One moment he was there, the next, I trailed off, the memory still sharp despite the years. Daniel was still young, I added. He needed me. Andrew didn't interrupt, didn't offer comfort. He just listened. The hospital. I hesitated. It demanded everything. Long hours, late nights, Constant pressure. I swallowed. I couldn't be there for him the way he needed if I stayed. So you chose him, Andrew said. Yes, I replied, without hesitation. And that was the truth. There had been no debate, no second guessing. My son had needed me, and I had chosen to be his mother first. Always. I thought I was doing the right thing, I said quietly. Andrew tilted his head slightly. You were, he said. I let out a soft, almost bitter laugh. Then why does it feel like I lost everything anyway? The question hung in the air between us. Heavy, unanswered, because some questions don't have simple answers. I gave him everything. I continued, my voice trembling just slightly. My time, my energy, my career. I looked up at Andrew, and in the end, he looked at me like I had nothing left to offer. Andrew's expression didn't change, but his voice softened. That doesn't mean it's true. I shook my head slowly. It felt true, I said. And feelings can lie, he replied. I didn't respond right away, because part of me wanted to argue, wanted to defend the pain, the reality of what I had lived through. But another part of me, the part that had stood in that room earlier, knew he was right. I stopped seeing myself the way I used to. I admitted. I know, he said, quietly. I looked at him surprised. How? Because I did the same thing, he replied. That caught me off guard. You? I asked. He nodded. Not in the same way, he clarified. But there was a time when I stopped trusting myself, stopped believing I was good enough. I frowned slightly. I find that hard to believe. He smiled faintly. That's because you only remember me after you trained me, he said. I couldn't help but smile back just a little. That's fair, I admitted. He straightened slightly, his tone shifting again. Joseph, he said more seriously now. You didn't lose who you are. I looked at him. You just stopped using it. The words hit me in a way I wasn't prepared for, because they weren't harsh. They weren't accusatory. But they were honest, and honesty has a way of cutting deeper than anything else. I thought that part of my life was over, I said. Why? He asked. Because I walked away from it, I replied. That doesn't erase it, he said. I let that sit for a moment, because he was right. Again. I told myself it was a chapter, I said slowly, something that had ended. And now, he asked. I looked down the hallway, at the movement, at the life, at the place that had once been everything to me. I don't know, I admitted. That was the truth. For the first time in a long time, I didn't have a clear answer. And strangely, that didn't scare me as much as I thought it would. Andrew pushed himself off the wall. We're holding a small internal meeting this afternoon, he said. Staff only. I looked at him confused. Why? He hesitated for just a second, then said, Because people need to understand what happened in that room. I felt a slight tension in my chest. I don't need recognition. I said quickly, That's not what this is about, he replied. Then what is it about? He met my eyes. Perspective, he said. I didn't fully understand what he meant, but something in his tone told me this wasn't just about the patient or the protocol or even me. It was about something bigger. I'll think about it, I said. He nodded. That's all I'm asking. He turned to leave, then paused. One more thing, he added. I waited. You don't have to prove anything to anyone, he said. Then, after a brief moment, but you might want to remember it for yourself." And with that, he walked away, leaving me alone in the hallway once again. But this time, the silence felt different. Not empty, not heavy, just quiet. I leaned back against the chair, closing my eyes for a moment. And for the first time in years, I allowed myself to ask a different question. Not what did I lose, but what do I still have? And the answer was more than I expected. The meeting room was already half full when I walked in. I almost turned around, not because I was afraid of the people, but because I wasn't sure I was ready to be seen by them. Really seen. For years, I had learned how to disappear, how to shrink myself into the background, how to exist without taking up space. And now, I was about to stand in front of a room full of professionals who would be looking directly at me, expecting something. I hesitated at the doorway. "Joseph." I turned. Andrew stood behind me. "You don't have to do this," he said quietly. I looked back into the room. Doctors talking, nurses taking seats, young residents glancing at their notes. "This isn't about them," I said softly. He waited. "It's about me," I added, and that was the truth. This wasn't about recognition or approval or proving anything to anyone. It was about facing something I had avoided for too long, myself. I took a slow breath, then stepped inside. The conversations quieted almost immediately. Not completely, but enough that I could feel the shift. Eyes turning, whispers stopping, curiosity filling the space. I kept walking, each step measured, steady, until I reached the front of the room. Andrew followed, taking a position slightly to the side. He didn't introduce me right away. He let the silence settle, let the anticipation build. Then he spoke. "Thank you all for coming on short notice," he began. His voice carried easily across the room, calm, controlled, authoritative. "This morning, we had a critical case in the emergency unit." Heads nodded. A few people shifted in their seats. "You've all seen the reports," he continued. "But what you haven't seen is what actually made the difference." He paused, then turned toward me. "This is Joseph Blackwood." The name moved through the room like a ripple. Some people frowned slightly. Others looked confused. A few older staff members stiffened. "Recognition," Andrew continued. "Many of you don't know her," he said. "But you should." I felt my hands tighten slightly at my sides. "This hospital runs on protocols," he went on. "Procedures, systems, methods we trust." He gestured lightly toward the screens behind him. "And most of those methods, this hospital runs on protocols," he went on. "Procedures, systems, methods we trust." He gestured lightly toward the screens behind him. "And most of those methods were influenced by her work." The room grew still, completely still. I could see it now, the realization beginning to form. "She trained many of the doctors who trained you," Andrew added. A murmur spread through the audience. Soft, surprised, uncertain. And then he said it. The protocol that saved that patient this morning was hers. Silence. Not the empty kind, the heavy kind, the kind that forces people to rethink everything they thought they knew. I could feel their eyes on me now, not just curious, not just polite, but searching, trying to reconcile the woman standing in front of them with the name they had just heard. I swallowed slowly. "You can say something," Andrew said quietly beside me. I nodded, took a step forward, and for a brief second, the words didn't come. Because I wasn't used to speaking in rooms like this anymore. Wasn't used to being the one people listened to. But then, and for a brief second, the words didn't come. Because I wasn't used to speaking in rooms like this anymore. Wasn't used to being the one people listened to. But then, something steadied inside me. The same thing that had steadied me earlier in that emergency room. I looked out at them. At the young faces. At the experienced ones. At the ones who reminded me of who I used to be. I didn't come here expecting this. I began. My voice was calm, clear. Even to my own surprise. I didn't come here expecting to stand in front of you. A few people shifted, listening. I came because someone said lives were at stake. I continued, a quiet nod from Andrew. And when you hear that I paused slightly, you don't think about anything else. The room remained silent, focused. You don't think about how long it's been, I said, or whether you still belong. My voice softened slightly. You just act. I let that sit for a moment because I knew they understood that part. Every single person in that room had felt that pressure at some point. That's what medicine is, I went on. Not just knowledge, not just training. I met their eyes. It's responsibility. A few heads nodded now. Subtle, but real. And responsibility doesn't disappear just because you step away from it, I added. I felt my throat tighten slightly, but I didn't stop. Sometimes I said slowly, we convince ourselves that we're no longer needed. A quiet shift in the room. Not just professional now, personal. Because that feeling, it isn't limited to one career, one moment, one life. And sometimes, I continued, we're wrong. Silence. Deep. Resonant. I took a breath. You don't lose what you've built, I said. You don't lose what you've learned. I paused. You just stop using it. I saw it then. The understanding, not in everyone, but in enough of them. Enough to matter. I stepped back slightly. I'm not here to tell you how to do your jobs, I said. You already know that. A faint smile. Barely there. I'm just here to remind you that what you do matters more than you think. I let the words settle, then added more quietly. And so do you. The room stayed silent for a second longer. Then applause. Not loud, not overwhelming, but genuine, real. And as it filled the room, I felt something I hadn't felt in years. Not pride. Not exactly. Something deeper. Something quieter. Validation. Not from them, but from myself. Because for the first time in a long time, I had spoken as the person I truly was. Not as someone's mother. Not as someone's burden. Not as someone who had been left behind, but as Joseph Blackwood. And that was enough. The first time Daniel saw me again was not in person. It was on a screen, and somehow that made it worse. I didn't know it at the time. I was still at the hospital, still processing everything that had happened, still trying to understand what my life was becoming. But miles away, in the same house I had been pushed out of just days before, everything was beginning to unravel. Melissa was the one who turned on the television. It was late afternoon, the living room quiet except for the soft hum of the news channel in the background. Daniel sat on the couch, scrolling through his phone, barely paying attention. Daniel, Melissa said suddenly. Her tone wasn't casual. It wasn't annoyed. It was sharp. He looked up. What? Look at this? He frowned slightly and glanced at the screen. At first, he didn't react, because he wasn't really looking. But then, something caught his attention. Something familiar. He leaned forward slightly. Wait. The camera zoomed in. The headline at the bottom of the screen read, "Emergency case at St. Mary's saved by former medical pioneer." And then, my face appeared. Older, tired, but unmistakably me. Daniel froze, completely still. "That's," he whispered. Melissa didn't respond, because she already knew. "It can't be," he said, shaking his head slightly. But the screen didn't change, and neither did the truth. The reporter's voice filled the room. Earlier today, a critical patient at St. Mary's Medical Center was saved thanks to the intervention of Joseph Blackwood, a former medical expert whose groundbreaking protocols are still used today. Melissa's hand tightened slightly on the remote. Daniel stood up slowly, eyes fixed on the screen, as if looking away would somehow make it disappear. "They said her name?" he said. Melissa swallowed. "Yes. That's not possible," he insisted. "She hasn't worked in years." The report continued. Clips of the hospital, staff speaking, Andrew's voice calm and composed. "She trained many of us. What she did today reminded us all what experience truly means." Daniel's face changed, not all at once, but piece by piece. Confusion, then disbelief, then something deeper, something heavier. "No," he murmured. Melissa turned to him. "Daniel." But he didn't respond, because now he was remembering all the things he hadn't asked, all the things he hadn't cared to know, all the moments where he had simply accepted the version of me that was easiest to believe. "She never told me," he said. Melissa hesitated. "Maybe she didn't think it mattered anymore," she said quietly. The words hung in the air, and for the first time, they sounded wrong, deeply wrong. Daniel ran a hand through his hair, pacing slightly. "I told her she didn't contribute anything," he said. His voice was quieter now, more fragile. "I told her she was a burden." Melissa didn't respond, because there was nothing to say. The television continued. Another clip, another voice. A nurse emotional. "She saved that patient. We didn't know what to do, and I told her she was a burden." Melissa didn't respond, because there was nothing to say. The television continued. Another clip, another voice. "A nurse emotional. She saved that patient. We didn't know what to do, and she just knew." Daniel stopped pacing, his chest rising and falling more quickly now. "That's not..." he started, then stopped, because the words didn't make sense anymore. Nothing did. Not the way he had treated me, not the way he had spoken to me, not the way he had let me walk out that door. He turned toward the hallway, toward the front door, as if expecting me to be there, as if expecting to undo everything that had already been done. "She was sleeping in her car," he said suddenly. Melissa's eyes widened slightly. "What?" "I saw her," he said. "The night she left. She stayed in the driveway for a while before driving off." His voice cracked slightly. "And I didn't go after her." Silence filled the room. Heavy, unforgiving. Melissa lowered herself slowly onto the couch. "I didn't know," she whispered. Daniel let out a bitter breath. "I didn't want to know," he said. That was the truth. And it hit harder than anything else, because it wasn't ignorance. It was choice. The report ended. The screen shifted to something else. But the damage had already been done. The truth had already been revealed, and there was no going back. Daniel stood there for a long moment, then grabbed his keys. "Where are you going?" Melissa asked. He didn't answer right away, because the answer wasn't simple. Not anymore. I have to find her, he said finally. Melissa hesitated. And then what? He stopped, hand still on the door. I don't know, he admitted. Because how do you fix something like this? How do you undo words that cut so deeply? How do you face someone you've already pushed away? He opened the door, stepped outside, and for the first time in his life, Daniel Blackwood didn't feel like he was in control of anything. Back at the hospital, I had no idea what was happening. No idea that my life was being discussed in a living room I had once called home. No idea that the people who had erased me were now being forced to see me clearly. I was standing by a window watching the sun begin to set. The light soft, golden, peaceful. And for the first time in a long time, I wasn't thinking about what I had lost. I was thinking about what I had found. Purpose, clarity, myself. But life has a way of bringing things full circle. And even as I stood things full circle, and even as I stood there breathing in that quiet moment, I could feel it. Something else was coming. Something I hadn't faced yet. Because no matter how far you go, some things find their way back to you. I heard my name before I saw him. Mom, there, breathing in that quiet moment. I could feel it. Something else was coming. Something I hadn't faced yet. Because no matter how far you go, some things find their way back to you. I heard my name before I saw him. Mom. The word stopped me in my tracks, not because I didn't recognize the voice, but because of how it sounded. Not impatient, not distracted, not distant, but uncertain, careful, almost afraid. I turned slowly, and there he was, Daniel, standing at the end of the hallway like he didn't quite know if he had the right to be there. For a moment, neither of us moved, because there are some distances that aren't measured in steps. They're measured in words, in silence, in things that can't be undone. You found me, I said quietly. It wasn't a question. He nodded. I saw the news, he said. Of course he did. I studied his face. He looked the same, and completely different at the same time. The same features, the same posture. But something had shifted. The confidence he used to carry so easily was gone, replaced by something heavier. Regret. I didn't know, he said quickly. The words came out rushed, like he had been holding them in the entire way here. I didn't know who you were, he added. I tilted my head slightly. And that matters now, I asked. He flinched, not visibly to anyone else, but I saw it, because I knew him. He struggled, searching for the right words. I didn't know what you had done, what you were capable of. I let out a slow breath. That's true, I said. His shoulders dropped slightly. Relief, but it didn't last. Because you never asked, I finished. The silence that followed was sharp, precise, unavoidable. Daniel looked down. I thought I knew you, he said quietly. I nodded. So did I. That made him look up again, confusion flickering across his face. I thought you saw me, I continued. Not just who I used to be, not just what I did. My voice remained calm, but steady. I thought you saw me as your mother. His expression broke slightly. I do, he said quickly. Do you? I asked. Not harsh, not angry, just honest. Because the truth didn't need to be loud. It just needed to be clear. He opened his mouth, then closed it again, because the answer wasn't simple anymore. I made a mistake, he said finally. I nodded slowly. Yes, I said. You did. No anger, no accusation, just acknowledgement. And somehow that made it harder for him to stand there. I didn't realize what I was doing, he said. That's not true, I replied. He froze. You realized. I continued. You just didn't think it mattered. The words landed heavily, because they were true, and truth has a way of stripping away excuses. I thought he hesitated. I thought you'd be okay. I let out a soft breath. I was sleeping in my car, I said. His face tightened instantly. I know, he whispered. I saw. I studied him carefully, and you didn't come out. He shook his head slightly, his voice barely audible. No. Why, I asked. It wasn't rhetorical. I wanted to hear the answer, because sometimes you need to hear it out loud to truly understand it. He swallowed. I didn't know what to say, he admitted. I nodded. That's honest, I said. Then I added, but it wasn't enough. The words hung between us, not cruel, not punishing, just real. He stepped closer, slowly, carefully, like approaching something fragile. I'm sorry, he said. I watched him, not just listening to the words, but searching for what was behind them. Guilt. Yes. Regret. Definitely. But also something else. Something new. Understanding. I should have never let you leave like that, he continued. I should have stood up for you. I should have. You should have seen me, I said gently. He stopped, because that was the truth. Not the actions, not the circumstances, just that. I do see you now, he said. I held his gaze. And what do you see? I asked. He didn't hesitate this time. Someone I underestimated, he said. I nodded slowly. That's part of it. He frowned slightly. What do you mean? I took a small step forward, closing some of the distance between us. I'm not just someone you underestimated, I said. My voice was calm, but firm. I'm someone you dismissed. That word hit harder, because it carried more weight, more intention, more truth. Daniel's eyes filled slightly. I didn't mean to, I know I said, and I did. But intention doesn't erase impact. I didn't realize how much you gave up for me, he said. I tilted my head slightly. That's because I didn't make you carry it, I replied. Silence, soft, heavy. I chose you, I continued. Every time. His breathing grew uneven. I left my career, I said. I left everything I built. Not as a complaint, not as a sacrifice to throw in his face, just as truth. I don't regret that, I added. He looked at me surprised. You don't? I shook my head. No, I said, because at the time it was the right choice. Then I paused, but what I didn't expect, my voice softened slightly, was that one day you would treat that choice like it erased who I am. The words settled deep. Daniel looked like he wanted to say something, to fix it, to undo it. But there are some things you can't fix with words. I can't change what I did, he said finally. No, I agreed, but you can decide what you do next. He nodded slowly, hope flickering faintly in his eyes. Does that mean, he hesitated, you'll come back? There it was, the question he had been building toward, the one that mattered most to him. I didn't answer right away, because the answer mattered, not just for him, but for me. I looked around the hospital, at the people passing by, at the place that had just reminded me who I was. Then I looked back at him. No, I said. The word was quiet, but final. He froze. I can't go back to that, I continued, not harsh, not angry, just certain. I can't go back to being invisible in my own life. His face fell. But that doesn't mean, I paused slightly, choosing my words carefully, that I don't care about you. He looked up again, hope and pain mixing in his expression. I love you, I said, and I meant it, because that had never changed. But love doesn't mean accepting everything. It just means I'm choosing myself now too. The words felt new, but right. And as I stood there looking at my son, I realized something. This wasn't the end of our relationship, but it was the end of the version that had broken me. And that, after Daniel left, I didn't follow him. I didn't call him back. I didn't stand there watching him walk away the way I used to. Instead, I stayed exactly where I was. Because this time, I wasn't losing something. I was choosing something. And that made all the difference. I turned back toward the window, letting the quiet settle around me again. But it wasn't the same quiet as before. It wasn't filled with loneliness, or doubt, or the question of where I belonged. It was steady, grounded, the kind of quiet that comes when you finally understand your own worth. You handled that well. I glanced over my shoulder. Andrew stood a few steps away, arms crossed loosely, watching me with a calm expression. I wasn't trying to handle anything I said. I was just being honest. He nodded. That's usually harder. I let out a soft breath. Yes, I admitted. It is. He stepped closer, stopping beside me. Is he going to be okay? He asked. I knew he wasn't talking about the patient. Hell have to be, I said, quietly. Andrew studied me for a moment. And you? He asked. I didn't hesitate this time. I already am. The answer surprised even me. Not because it wasn't true, but because I had never said it out loud before, not with that kind of certainty. He smiled slightly. I believe you. We stood there in silence for a moment. Then he spoke again. I want to offer you something. I turned to him. A position, he said. Consulting. Flexible hours. No pressure. I raised an eyebrow slightly. No pressure, I repeated. He gave a small shrug. As close as this place gets, he said. I couldn't help but smile. The idea wasn't unexpected, not after everything that had happened, but hearing it out loud made it real in a way I hadn't prepared for. I don't know, I said slowly, and I meant it, not because I doubted my ability, but because I understood the weight of the choice. Going back into this world, even in a different way, would change everything again. You don't have to decide now, Andrew said. I know, I replied. But I also knew something else. I walked away from that life once because I thought I had to, because I believed my only value existed in one role. A mother, a caregiver, someone who gave everything without keeping anything for herself. But now I understood something I hadn't understood back then. You can love your family and still choose yourself. I'll think about it, I said. He nodded. That's all I'm asking. He started to walk away, then paused. You know, he added, you don't need to prove anything anymore. I looked at him. Not to them. He continued. Not to anyone. I tilted my head slightly, and to myself I asked. He smiled. You already did. And then he left, leaving me alone again, but not the kind of alone I had felt before. This was different. This was space. Space to think, to decide, to breathe. I left the hospital later that evening. Not rushed, not uncertain, just ready. The sky was turning a soft shade of orange as the sun dipped lower, casting long shadows across the parking lot. I walked to my car, slowly taking in the moment, because for the first time in days, I wasn't wondering where I would go. I was choosing where I wanted to be. I sat behind the wheel, hands resting lightly, the engine still off. And for a moment, I just sat there, thinking. Not about the past, not about the pain, but about the future. My future. I reached into the glove compartment and pulled out the old photograph again. The one of me in the white coat. The one I had almost left behind. I studied it carefully. Not with regret, not with longing, but with understanding. That was never gone, I whispered. And now neither was I. I placed the photo back gently, then started the engine. But instead of turning toward the motel, I paused. Because suddenly, that place didn't feel like where I belonged anymore either. Not after today. Not after everything I had remembered. I took out my phone, scrolled for a moment, then stopped. There was a number I hadn't considered before. Not from the past, but from something new. A small apartment listing I had seen earlier that day on a bulletin board inside the hospital. Simple, affordable, close enough to walk, a fresh start. I dialed, waited. Hello, a voice answered. Yes. I said, my voice calm, steady. I'm calling about the apartment. As I spoke, I realized something. This wasn't about survival anymore. It was about building something new, on my terms. After the call ended, I sat back, letting the reality settle in. A place of my own, a role I could choose, a life that wasn't defined by what I had lost, but by what I had reclaimed. I put the car into gear, pulled out of the parking lot, and this time, I didn't look back. Because I wasn't leaving something behind. I was moving forward, and for the first time in a very long time, that felt right. A week later, I was standing in a small apartment that smelled faintly of fresh paint and possibility. It wasn't large, it wasn't fancy, but it was mine. Every corner of it, every quiet moment inside it, mine. I placed the last box down near the window and stepped back, looking around slowly. A simple couch, a small kitchen table, a bookshelf that wasn't filled yet but would be, and near the door, my coat. Not just any coat, my white one. I had gone back for it, not to reclaim the past, but to acknowledge it, to carry it forward on my own terms. I walked over and ran my fingers lightly along the sleeve. It felt different now, not like a weight, not like something I had lost, but like something I had chosen to pick up again. There was a soft knock on the door. I turned. For a moment I wasn't sure who it would be, but when I opened it, I wasn't surprised. Daniel stood there, not hesitant this time, not unsure, just present. Hi, he said quietly. Hi, I replied. We stood there for a second, neither of us rushing the moment. Then I stepped aside. Do you want to come in? He nodded. Yeah, if that's okay. It is. He walked in slowly, looking around the apartment with quiet curiosity. It's nice, he said. Thank you. I replied. He paused near the window. It suits you. I smiled slightly. I think so too. We stood in silence for a moment, but it wasn't uncomfortable. Not like before, just new. I've been thinking a lot, he said finally. I nodded. I can tell. He let out a small breath. I don't expect things to go back to how they were, he said. That's good, I replied gently, because they won't. He nodded. I understand that now. I studied him carefully. And for the first time in a long time, I saw something I hadn't seen before. Not just guilt. Not just regret. Growth. I was wrong about you, he said. I tilted my head slightly. Yes, I said, you were. He gave a small, almost sad smile. I think I was wrong about a lot of things. That happens, I said. He looked at me. Are we okay? He asked. It was a simple question, but it carried everything. I didn't answer right away, because okay doesn't mean what people think it do as, not after something like this. Where it was a simple question, but it carried everything. I didn't answer right away, because okay doesn't mean what people think it does, not after something like this. We're different, I said finally. He nodded slowly. I can accept that. And we're honest now, I added. That's better than what we had before. He let that sink in. Then nodded again. Yeah, he said. It is. There was another knock at the door. We both turned. I frowned slightly. I wasn't expecting anyone else. I opened the door. Melissa stood there. For a moment, none of us spoke, because some conversations take time to begin. Hi, she said quietly. Her voice was softer than I had ever heard it. Hi, I replied. She glanced at Daniel, then back at me. I didn't know if I should come, she admitted. I stepped aside. You're here now. She walked in slowly, her eyes taking in the apartment. It's beautiful, she said. Thank you. There was an awkward pause. Then she spoke again. I owe you an apology. I didn't interrupt. I judged you, she said. I reduced you to something you were never meant to be. Her voice trembled slightly. And I treated you like you didn't matter. The words hung in the air, heavy, honest. I'm sorry, she finished. I looked at her, really looked at her, and for the first time, I didn't feel anger or resentment, just clarity. I accept your apology, I said. Her eyes widened slightly. Really? Yes, I replied. Then I added, but that doesn't mean everything goes back to the way it was. She nodded quickly. I understand, and I mean that, she said. I don't expect anything from you. I studied her for a moment longer, then nodded. Good. Because forgiveness isn't about restoring the past. It's about freeing yourself from it. We stood there together, 3 people, connected, changed, but still standing. I have something to tell you both, I said. They looked at me. I accepted the consulting position at the hospital. Daniel smiled slightly. That doesn't surprise me. Melissa nodded. It makes sense. I'll be working a few days a week, I continued, helping train younger staff, sharing what I know. And for the first time, there was no hesitation in my voice, no doubt, just certainty. That's amazing, Daniel said. I smiled. I think so too. We talked a little longer. Nothing dramatic, nothing overwhelming, just small things, simple things. And when they left, I didn't feel empty. I didn't feel abandoned. I felt complete. Later that evening, I stood by the window again, watching the city lights flicker on one by one. Life moving, changing, continuing. And I thought about everything that had happened. The pain, the loss, the moment I stood outside that door with nowhere to go, and the moment I stood in that hospital room saving a life. Two versions of me, both real, both true, but only one of them defined who I chose to be. I placed my hand lightly against the glass, and for the first time in a long time, I didn't feel like I was looking at a world I didn't belong to. I felt like I was exactly where I was supposed to be. Not because someone gave me a place, but because I claimed it, and that made all the difference. Every life has seasons where we feel invisible, where the people we love fail to see our worth, and where we begin to question it ourselves. But the truth is, your value is not determined by how others treat you. It is defined by everything you have lived, learned, and carried through the years. Sometimes the world forgets who you are, and sometimes you forget too. But that doesn't mean it's gone. It just means it's waiting to be remembered. Joseph's story reminds us that it's never too late to reclaim your identity, to stand in your truth, and to choose yourself again. You can love others deeply without losing yourself in the process. And when you finally do choose yourself, something powerful happens. You don't just survive, you begin to live again. If this story touched your heart, I'd truly love to hear your thoughts. Have you ever felt unseen or underestimated by your own family? Share your story in the comments. Your voice matters more than you think. And if you believe in stories about strength, healing, and second chances, don't forget to like and subscribe so we can keep sharing these journeys together.